Hi from me, Lauren Jaffe, and welcome to another episode of Derech Eretz. Animals play a big part in reminding us of our responsibility to care. Today, David Wilchitz talks about his activism in this area, and Rabbi Dr. Dean Gershon shares how he rescued a zebra that landed up in the middle of Glen Hazel, a suburb in Josie. First up, we have Rabbi Thurgood, who gives us a view from the Torah.
Care for animals in Judaism is extremely important. One of the key verses is from Ashrei, Psalm 145, that we say every day, V'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Hashem's compassion extends to all of his creations, which our sages understand as referring specifically to the world of animals. The same way that Hashem cares for all creatures, for all living things, every one of us is instructed to play that same role, to follow the example of Hashem, and to love and care for all creatures, and to do our best to take care of the animal world and the entire world that Hashem has created. The Maharal of Prague, the great sage of the 16th century, said that one who truly loves God will love all that he has created. In other words, our love of animals and our care for animals comes from a profoundly religious space, as well as a general feeling of kinship with the animal kingdom. There is a sense that every animal is created by the hand of God, is beloved by God, and therefore we fulfill part of our obligation to love God through loving his creations and through loving his animals. One of the clearest examples of how Hashem loves and cares for animals is to be found in the Shema, the most important declaration of our faith that we say at least twice every day. The second paragraph, when Hashem is promising us good rewards for following in his ways and for observing the mitzvot, for keeping the commandments, Hashem says, "V'natati esev basaracha livhimtecha ve'achalta v'savata." I will place food, I'll place grass in your land for your animals, and you will eat and be satisfied. From here, the Gemara, the Talmud understands that we are obligated to feed our animals first before we ourselves eat. In the same way that Hashem says, I will provide food for the animals and then for the human beings, we too must take care of the animals under our care even before we take care of ourselves. Another example of how integral care of animals is in Judaism is in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 24, when Abraham's servant Eliezer is on his quest to find the bride for Yitzchak, to find the wife for Isaac, and he meets Rivka, Rebecca, at the well. And he asks Hashem to find the most perfect woman, the ideal bride for Yitzchak. One of the requirements, he says, I will ask her for water, she will give water to me, and also to my camels. And indeed, the Torah continues, he asked Rivka for water and she gave to him, and then she gave water to all of the camels. And when he tells the story to her family, he makes the point of offering water to, she offered water to him and also to his camels. My Rabbi Goldfein of blessed memory, asked, what's with all the camels? Why do they come up again and again? It's clearly something so central. 3 times I mentioned the fact that you must give water to camels. There are several answers to this question. The answer of the Meshech Chochmah, Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, is that by offering water not only to Eliezer, to the servant, but also to all of the camels, she shows a profound love of animals as well as human beings. She shows that she understands her responsibility in this world is not only to show kindness and care for other people, but to show kindness and care for animals as well. These camels had come on a long journey. They needed to be taken care of. As I'm sure you know, camels drink a great deal of water. A camel can drink 100 liters of water when it's gone on a journey. Here there were 10 camels. So potentially she was fetching up to 1,000 liters of water. That's a ton of water. Whether she really needed to get that much, whether the camels were quite that thirsty, that I can't tell you. What I can tell you is she was willing to go to that effort, carrying tens or hundreds of kilograms of water to care for and provide for those camels. The example that we see from our matriarch, our mother Rivka, is that if she was willing to go to these lengths, to put in this kind of effort, to take care and show concern for animals, this is certainly the path of the Torah in which we should all go.
David Wilshitz has always been a lover of animals, and as he journeyed through his legal career, he took that love for animals with him. Today we chat to him about different animal rights cases in South Africa that he's been involved with, and of course we talk about animal rights through a Jewish lens.
Animals are sentient creatures. They have a consciousness, they have a well-being, they have interests. Life can go better or worse for animals, just like it can with human beings. In fact, we are animals, right? And we often think we're not. And as a result, it seems to me it's actually an arbitrary prejudice to think that only human beings deserve protection. Why is it only our species that matters? In fact, if we actually extend the logic of the protection of fundamental rights, and rights protect our very most basic interests in things like food, housing, not being tortured, all those freedom to express our behaviors, we realize that animals also deserve those protections. I grew up in Johannesburg in the Jewish community. I grew up in an Orthodox household, a modern Orthodox household, and gradually over the course of my teenage years, I questioned some of the things that were going on, particularly around issues around gender in Judaism, sexuality in Judaism, and issues also around what I saw was the ethics of Judaism and the disconnect with the practices around animals. And so gradually that questioning led me to take a different route. I now belong to a progressive synagogue in Johannesburg, Beit Emmanuel, and gradually that led me on a process towards activism around animals and around actually this becoming one of the research areas of my own scholarship around animal welfare and animal rights. Animal Law Reform South Africa is one of the organizations that I've been involved with in being a co-founder of. And the idea was we saw that there are many aspects of South African law that need to be thought of in relation to animals. In 2016, the Constitutional Court gave a groundbreaking ruling in which it said that animals need to be protected as individuals with respect for their intrinsic value. And that opens the door to looking at our laws once again and saying, do these laws respect animals with intrinsic value? And so Animal Law Reform South Africa was created to actually examine the different laws, to be involved in the very policy-making and law-making processes to try and change the laws in South Africa to protect the intrinsic value of animals. Jewish values have been an important part. On the one hand, there is that universal component that applies to everyone, and I think the arguments that I would make today would in many ways be universal, but I also come from a particular place. And Jewish ethics was incredibly advanced in relation to animal for its time, and it remains in many ways advanced. The problem in many ways is the relationship between the practices in society and the actual extent of the ethics. The ideal in the book of Genesis is actually veganism, right? Once every being is created, what is given to human beings for food is plants and all that comes from trees, right? It's not animals. That's the ideal, and actually we see that ideal because of violence in the world. We see the emergence and allowance for eating meat, and we actually see, in fact, God once again trying to establish a vegan community. Once the children of Israel actually leave Egypt, they have manna, and then they complain. They want meat, right? And when God actually gives them meat, right, the quail that fall down from heaven, there's actually a plague that goes amongst the community. And that place where that plague occurred was called Kivrot HaTa'ava, which is the graves of lust. And this idea of eating meat is seen as something not very positive in Jewish ethics. It's really a lustful idea. There is also a commandment, a strong commandment in Jewish, from the Torah itself, the most important, really the constitution in a way of the Jewish people, which prohibits unnecessary cruelty to animals. And one of the things that distresses me is that actually in many ways Jewish communities which regard themselves as practicing and deeply religious fail to embed or observe that commandment in their lives. So I think that inspiration, that ethics, that care for all the creatures of God, that is something that was deeply embedded in me, and it has helped me along that path of trying to protect and defend the interests of animals. in 1967, it was decided by some Kruger scientists that the Kruger Park could only have 7,000 elephants. And so every year after that, when they thought there were more elephants, they would kill huge herds of elephants in one go. And this was, in fact, like today, I regard it as a type of a mass slaughter. Imagine killing whole families of elephants. And this took place all the way up to the new democratic South Africa, when the new government put a moratorium on culling. And there was a pressure about 10 years later to lift the moratorium. And I was involved in the arguments. There were a number of workshops and discussions and eventually meetings with a minister making the case that the culling of elephants was not justified scientifically, but also it was completely unjustified ethically. And that actually, those inputs led to a change. And the minister at the time actually brought in the new regulations around elephants and made culling the matter of last resort. So in most cases, culling doesn't exist in South Africa today. And that was a really positive story. And actually that kind of progression has led now the current minister, Barbara Creasy, to actually build on these developments and also some of the work of the Constitutional Court to actually introduce a new ethic for animals in South Africa, recognizing that environmental policy and law needed to respect the welfare of animals and also respect their value. And that's a very significant change that has taken place. I've been involved in my own community in trying to change practices. Beit Emmanuel, for example, now today almost entirely caters vegetarian for its community as a whole. And one interesting example that happened was at the Pesach Seder, which is the meal that we have all together where we recount the exodus of the Jews from slavery in Egypt to freedom. And at that meal, there are many symbolic aspects. And one aspect we have is something called a Seder plate. And on that plate, there are many different things. One thing that is there is also traditionally been a shank bone. And that's a reminder of the Passover sacrifice, where the children of Israel killed lambs and they put their blood on the houses, and God passed over the houses of the children of Israel. Having the shank bone there, for me, is troubling, because today, knowing how animals are treated, we are going to be celebrating a festival of freedom by having a symbol or by having an example of an animal who has been confined and been in conditions which have been very much the antithesis of freedom. And so I argued into my community, and when I led the Pesach meal at one point, we put a beetroot there instead. It's a memory of the history of what happened, right? And it was a very different time, and there was different issues involved, but we didn't actually participate in the ongoing oppression of animals and the ongoing confinement and exploitation of them. And that's the challenge, and I think that's the thing I will hope people will ask questions about. What are the practices we involve with, and are those practices really consistent with our Jewish ethics, our Jewish laws, and as well as the universal laws and morality that we all are obligated in relation to? Well, my Derech Eretz is to really respect every single sentient being and creature. I don't think we can see human beings and animals and just focus on one dimension. For me, it's about linking and considering the linkages between humans, animals, and also actually the environment in which we live. We need to protect all three of those aspects. And that's the idea which I wish to live by, and I believe actually is not only a universal idea, but it's a very Jewish idea too.
This zebra behind me, Ziggy the zebra, might be tame, but at the end of the day, he is still a wild animal. So what would you do if you found a zebra in the middle of Glen Hazel, Johannesburg? Well, Dean Gershon is a rabbi and a doctor, and he has a great love for animals. He rescued Ziggy the zebra during the middle of lockdown. So we chat to him today about what exactly the story is around the rescued zebra.
Animals, as well as children, obviously you can't compare the two. Animals can't speak for themselves, and they're all dependent on the owner and how the owner looks after them. And there's so many sad cases of abused or neglected animals or unwanted pets. You know, most of our pets at home here are unwanted pets that people bought as pets. They might be exciting in the beginning, but after a few months or days, they realize that they're very hard to care for, and they're not as exciting as before. Puppies grow up and kittens grow up, and that's why they don't have a voice of their own. So we have to speak out for them, look after them. My mother runs an animal charity. She looks after stray dogs and cats. And as a child, people were always dropping animals at our house before anything was formal with my mother's animal rescue. And my first proper memory was 2 sheep were abandoned in the Free State. They were a few weeks old and they were extremely dehydrated. And friends of ours were on holiday at a resort where they found these sheep. So they were brought back to my house and they were bottle fed at my house. And from then on, I always knew that my life was going to involve animals. As I became more religious and as I moved on in my study of medicine, I saw the human body as a miracle, that there must be a divine creation, and that there are billions of ways that someone could get sick or die at every moment. And it's a complete miracle that we are alive at every moment. And I started doing circumcisions in my internship. And I realized that to combine my Torah values or my Jewish values with my medical knowledge would make a complete happiness or complete state of feeling that you've achieved or you are where you want to be and you're here in this world to perform what you're meant to perform. And bris milah, or the covenant circumcision, has taken over my life. At the end of my community service, we went to Israel. We lived in Jerusalem for 1.5 years, and all I did every day was learn Torah and learn bris milah, learn circumcisions. And when I came back, I was approached by a rabbi who runs a kollel, which is a Torah learning school for married men at night. And together with him, Rabbi Chaim Finkelstein, I started to learn one of the sections of becoming a rabbi, which involves the laws of kashrut, our strict dietary laws. And it took me about 6 years, and I qualified as a rabbi last year. And for me, it just fits with my life. Everything is God's work, whether it's medicine or whether it's being a rabbi, or whether it's being a moil, whether it's being a father, or whether it's looking after animals. So for me, there's no separation. It's all a continuation of the same thing. Well, we've got like our major and our minor animals. The major ones are the ones that interact with us, and the minor animals are the ones who kind of just live here and we feed. And then we've got animals who don't live at our house. So we have a zebra, we have 2 donkeys, and we've got a miniature horse. So I was on a farmer's WhatsApp group, and we got word during lockdown. It was, I think it was level 5 lockdown or level 4. And we got word of a zebra that had been abandoned by its mom at birth on a farm near Pretoria. And he was brought up and bottle fed. And he had 3 attempted releases where they would take him out, try to introduce him to another herd. And the problem was, every time they released him, when they woke up in the morning, the zebra was at the back door. And eventually it was decided that they couldn't reintegrate him. The farmer couldn't afford to keep him anymore, and he needed a place to go. My biggest worry, I'm quite anti-hunting, and my biggest worry that he would make an easy target. There were people who showed interest in that. And I often bring home animals, and my wife once said to me, if you bring home a zebra, that's fine, but anything else, I don't want. So we phoned the owner, we said we're going to take the zebra. We went with a wildlife vet who darted and sedated him, and we transported him to a house here in Glen Hazel. And we brought him at night, and the next morning he had jumped over the little fence. There were big fences around the house, but the little enclosure was in, and he was standing at the gate. And people were driving past and were jogging, and all of a sudden there was like a frenzy of voice notes and pictures and Facebook, and why is there a zebra in Glen Hazel? And I had to put out a lot of fires because, people often, social media warriors and that, jump to the worst. Oh my God, you're capturing this animal, what are you doing? And they phoned the SPCA, who already knew about it, and we had our permit and we had a vet. So we had him here in Glen Hazel for about 6 months. We'd go twice a day to feed him. And he's so tame, you can hug him, you can kiss him, our kids can sit him. He is a wild animal after all, so he is unpredictable. He can bite, he can kick, so you always have to be careful. And eventually when COVID was over and we got our permit, we got a beautiful farm, a friend of ours farm at the Vaal, which is, it's huge. It's about 400 hectares and it's on the riverfront, it's beautiful. And he lives the best life probably any zebra could ever live. In Judaism, animals are very important and the treatment of animals is very important. And there's a concept called Tsar Balei Chaim, which is the distress of any living creature is a very important thing for us, and we're obligated to relieve any stress or illness of animals and look after them. And together with the nature of wanting to help people and help animals and be a light unto the nations and help and heal the world, for me it fits in one. We're looking after God's creatures, whether they're human or animals. And for me, I'm doing God's work, whether I'm as a doctor helping heal people, and helping animals. For me it's the same. So my Derech Eretz is walking in the way of God in every aspect of your life and doing something called a Kiddush Hashem, meaning being an example or being glorifying our Jewish God's name, everyone's God's name, that when they see a religious person they say, wow, this is a messenger of God and he really is someone I want to aspire to be. So whether it's seeing patients at my work, helping animals, helping in my rabbinical duties and helping with my families, for me working in the ways of our Torah and laws of our Torah, making them practical, making them part of our lives and applying them to every aspect of your life, that Judaism is a lifestyle. We're a people and we're a lifestyle and we are a religion, and sometimes it's very hard to integrate all of them, that I'm a religious Jew or rabbi only when I'm at shul, not in my rooms at work. But to integrate all aspects of my life in the ways of Torah and being an example of my community, that for me is living with Derech Eretz.
Well, we've come to the end of the show for this week's episode of Derech Eretz. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a Facebook message at Derech Eretz Connect. From me, Lauren Jaffe, and the Derech Eretz team, have a beautiful week.